Welcome everyone to another session of CHIWORK. Today is a special session, so I want to kind of welcome Wellesley College class of Tangible User Interfaces. Thank you for joining us today. And just a reminder about format, today we're going to have 30 minutes of recorded conversation, and then we're going to have a follow-up conversation in which we kind of chat and network and have more informal interaction. So we're going to record the first 30 minutes and then turn off the recording. So welcome everyone, this is very exciting. We're going to have a panel of 4 PhD candidates today. So we're going to think about mixed reality for the future of work and well-being. I'm going to ask each of our guests today to introduce themselves and also share with us a little bit about their research and how their research relates to the future of work or well-being, or work and well-being together. So Monsurat, how about we start with you?
All right.
Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Monsurat and Ayanna, and I'm currently a PhD candidate in computer science at Tufts University. And in my research, I study how scientists use VR to collaborate remotely and investigate how we can design VR tools to support cognition and remote scientific collaboration. And so when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, all of us saw a huge shift to remote work and by extension, remote collaboration. And for most of us, collaboration is part of our daily lives. However, collaborating remotely is challenging. So I'm exploring how technologies like VR can be leveraged to support teams in embodying, spatializing, and socializing their data with themselves and others across distances. So one of the tools I've been developing is a note-taking system called Embodied Notes, where users use gestures to record multimodal notes that are represented as a thought bubble or a sphere that they can keep private for themselves or share with others. And I have a short demo video.
Oh, great.
Let me share my screen real quick. Great.
The following concept video demonstrates the features of Embodied Notes, a multimodal note-taking system in VR.
Yep, so with this prototype, I'm really planning to investigate the different design elements to kind of understand the role embodiment plays in note-taking for learning in VR and how it can be used to support cognition during scientific collaboration in VR.
Great, thank you. And I know that you'll be presenting this work at CHI as a work in progress, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Great. Nabil.
Hi everyone, I'm Nabil and I am doing my PhD at University of New Hampshire, and my research focus is on human-computer interaction for automated vehicles. In one of our current projects, we are looking into how drivers might expect to interact with the user interface of automated vehicles for working in different non-driving related tasks. So a little bit of background. So some of the cars we have on the road today, they have some advanced driver assistance systems like adaptive cruise control or lane keeping assistance, but the driver is still responsible for controlling the car all the time. But this will likely change when we have conditionally automated vehicles, where the car will be able to drive itself for some time and the driver can take over when needed. That will allow the driver to engage in different non-driving tasks like reading or writing emails or even working on presentations while the car is in automated mode. But the user interface of the cars on the road today, they are not designed to support this kind of task. And one possible solution for that is augmented reality windshield display, which basically projects some information on the driving scene and transform the windshield into a transparent display. We already kind of have a miniature version of this in the form of heads-up display. So heads-up display shows some information, driving information like speed and navigation instruction on a small part of the windshield in front of the driver. So a augmented reality windshield display will extend this into the whole windshield and transform it into a giant transparent display. Apart from the obvious benefits of extended display real estate, it also allows the drivers to engage in non-driving tasks without taking their eyes off the road. Now the question is, how do we interact with this kind of display? Traditional haptic interface like buttons or switches or even touch screen interface are not really convenient in this case because the display is quite far away from the drivers. So in this study, we are examining how the drivers expect to use gesture and voice commands to interact with augmented reality windshield display in automated cars for working in non-driving related tasks.
Great, thank you. So kind of we talked about two examples of interfaces to support work outside of the office, right? Scientists that are collaborating remotely in VR and commuters that are sitting in cars. I want with the next kind of two topics to also explore issues of well-being. So Ayanna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ayanna Seals, a PhD candidate at New York University. And my research focuses on evaluating how interface designs of emerging technologies, such as augmented reality, impact the cognitive and affective mechanisms underlying perception. So for example, I've been working on a series of studies exploring how visualizing pathogens kind of like layered on top of an individual impacts perceptions of risk. And this includes threat susceptibility, threat severity, also how it impacts negative emotions and moods and other predictors of behavior. And then lastly, how it impacts behavior intentions themselves, such as like properly washing your hands and vaccination intentions. And so recently this effort has also expanded to exploring these topics as they relate to visualizing air pollution, exploring the impact of self-focused AR, so those visualizing that information on top of the individual, but also comparing that with the impact of object presence, so just the presence of those threats. And so while these studies were conducted with AR in the form of video filters, so those are commonly experienced on apps like TikTok and Snapchat, it's kind of easy to imagine these designs presented in smart mirrors in the workplace. And so the future of workspaces might integrate augmented reality to visualize how certain behaviors can help keep individuals and their communities well and safe. And so in addition, I've been working with students from NYU and UCLA on the development of context-aware audio augmented reality to help individuals deal with workplace stress through an intelligent attentional bias training system. So that's another thing that's in the works. There's been a lot of research kind of connecting attentional bias to reactions to stress and anxiety. So we're looking at exploring mediating that through the use of augmented reality. And so thanks for having me here today, and I'm excited for our discussions.
Great, thank you for joining us. And I know that you're also presenting some work at CHI, so congratulations. Alberta.
Hi, I'm Alberta. I'm a PhD student at the University of New Hampshire, and I work at the Human-Computer Interactions Lab. My research focuses on productivity and well-being in remote work. And one of such projects we did in 2020 was sending out VR headsets to 20 participants at home. The motivation for that project being that people were stuck at home and couldn't go out and experience nature due to the pandemic and the lockdown. So we sent out VR headsets to participants, and it was a form of them to experience nature. And through that, we saw how technologies such as VR can help people experience nature even when they don't have the ability to actually go out. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Great, thank you. So all of you are exploring scenarios that had to be studied online during COVID in order to kind of make progress in your work. So not only that you had to explore new mixed reality scenarios for work and well-being, you also had to explore kind of novel research methods for mixed reality. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the research methods that you applied, what kind of remote user studies you ran, and what are some of the lessons for from running such studies. And maybe we can start with Monsurat again.
Absolutely. So before we actually came up with the concept of embodied notes, I actually conducted a qualitative study over a period of 4 weeks to kind of identify the needs of scientists collaborating remotely in VR. So we observed 2 interdisciplinary groups of scientists who were already meeting weekly, working on an NSF-funded project on coral reefs. So they were meeting on Zoom, and what we actually had them do was actually meet in a VR application called Spatial. And so over these 4 weeks, for a total of like 4 meetings, we had 14 scientists, and they included professors, graduate students, and postdocs. And their research areas included biology, science, computer science, and mathematics. So we bought and mailed them each an Oculus Quest 2 headset, which they were able to keep as compensation for participating in the study. We met each of them on Zoom to get their headset set up with the correct applications. And then we walked through like how to retrieve videos that they would be generating as they participated in the study. On the first day of the study, we had participants join on Zoom so that we could provide support if anything went wrong in VR. And then we jumped into VR. We split the first meeting into about a 30-minute tutorial in Spatial and then a 30-minute brainstorming session, and then allowed like participants to structure the remaining 3 meetings however they wanted to discuss their research data on corals. And after each meeting, which lasted about 60 minutes, we had participants rejoin on Zoom and complete a survey and group interview about their experience. So one of the lessons I learned from conducting this remote VR study is that you should really give participants plenty of time to get familiar with the virtual environment. So in actuality, I think our entire first meeting should have been dedicated to a tutorial in Spatial, and then also continue tutorials like throughout the sessions, because they weren't using VR as frequently. It was just during these weekly meetings. So kind of getting them more familiar with navigating the virtual environment. And then also sending them regular reminders to charge their headsets before the meeting, because it's not a device that they use regularly. So sometimes they were like, oh no, my headset isn't charged. Let me charge it real quick for a few minutes. So yes, definitely.
Great, I like these practical lessons. And maybe we can jump to Alberta, because you also interacted with VR, but you send them to users that are not necessarily expert users. So maybe we can hear about your kind of research methods and lessons.
Right, like I kind of echo what Monsurat said, like making sure you communicate with the participants. So in our case, we had 20 participants. None of them were really familiar with using VR. And in a sense, when they thought about using VR, they kind of thought it would be for a game, because that's how it's usually advertised. We used the Oculus Go, and we had to spend some time to train the participants. So we even made these instructional videos, which were up on YouTube for participants to refer to anytime they needed to. And then additionally, we met with participants prior to them using the headset. So our study ran for 9 weeks, but 6 out of the 9 weeks, participants actually used the VR headset, and they had to use it every day. So we did have to send them daily reminders. That was key. And I definitely think it's one of the biggest part when you're doing a remote study, to make sure that your participants actually understand the instructions for the task, and they get familiar with the technology before they actually use it.
Great, thank you. So in your case, they were been using it every day, right, over a period of time. What kind of data did you collect in the study?
With the study, so we had an additional task besides the VR, where participants had to answer some questions via text. So giving a rating of how stressed they were or how focused they were after doing the VR task, because the goal was to find out if the VR sort of eased the stress levels or make them more relaxed or calm. So we did take that information. We also asked them creativity questions in the form of a remote associate test, which is basically giving them 3 questions or 3 words and asking them to give a 4th word that best completes the 3. So we had creativity measures as well. With regards to the VR headset, we did do a post-interview after the study to get a better sense of how the experience was using the VR studies, whether their perceptions changed from the beginning of the study to the end, whether they intended to use the VR headset moving forward, and if they had a new appreciation for the technology.
Great, thank you. So both you and Monsurat kind of created or used applications that already exist on VR and send the VR headset to the users, but I know that Ayanna and Nabil had to develop applications in order to run their testing. So Ayanna, maybe you can tell us about your research method and the application that you developed for using in your research.
So the studies themselves were both or all non-moderated and remote. And so we had to kind of design specifically for that. And so for the applications themselves, actually huge thanks to Monsurat, because she developed the application in the first 2 studies. So we did custom built applications for that. That one was desktop based. And then in the 3rd study, it was mobile based. And so that kind of allowed us to create prototypes that were really functional, so that if people had issues, we could get that over with through testing, pilot testing, but later it'd be easy for them to use it in a non-moderated fashion. So we did that. Then we also used Prolific to actually recruit participants. That allowed us to get to a pretty high number. I think in total, we probably ended up with around 300 to 400 per study. And then we used Qualtrics for the questionnaires. And then to touch on the lessons question, so I think the major lesson was in figuring out how do we verify participation, verify that everything worked on each participant's system and that they interacted with it properly. And so what we ended up doing was taking screenshots after receiving informed consent, but then kind of manually going through those screenshots to make sure that everything worked. And so I think one lesson for going forward is trying to figure out a way to do verification in mixed reality, augmented reality, virtual reality that doesn't involve that type of invasive verification method, that has someone on camera constantly. That might be something that they're concerned about and could impact the way that they're answering questions. So for future work, I think that would be really interesting to address. But then also for the researchers, manually having to go through each photo can be time intensive. So that's something also to think about in the future.
Yeah, of course. Nabil?
Yes, so the study we are conducting is an online user elicitation study, where we are showing the participants some images of the user interface of the car, and we are asking them to show us using video recordings, how they think, like which gestures or voice commands would result in that user interface. And while designing the study, our aim was to make the whole process as simple as possible for the participants so that they can focus on the experiment and not worry too much about the technical stuff related to the experiment. So one of the challenges we were facing was like how to allow the participants to record their responses, because none of the popular online platforms, server platforms, actually allow the participants to record any videos. They can upload videos, but that would mean that the participant would have to do a lot of extra work. They'll have to record the video and then upload the video again. So we decided to build an website where the participant will just see the image and then just click one button to start the recording, record their responses, and then just click another button to stop the recording. So yeah, I think like Alberta and Monsurat said, like the participants usually run into different technical issues while participating in a remote study. So it's really important that we simplify the system as much as possible to help them.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question, and I really encourage the audience to ask questions both about your research, but also the question that I want to ask next is a little bit more personal, and it's about your experience doing your PhD during COVID. So you had to adapt your research methods, but also if you can share with us kind of what's the experiences like, what adjustment do you feel that you had to head, and what are your hopes for this kind of period that we're now kind of getting out of COVID slowly? So maybe Monsurat, we can start with you again.
So I think for me, transitioning to remote work in some ways helped me think about what I wanted to do for my thesis work. But in terms of like the actual research projects, like one of the things that I had to do was change the protocols for the kind of research that I wanted to do. So I haven't run some of these studies yet, but writing protocols for doing VR studies when there's COVID, and using these different boxes to like kind of keep the headsets clean, and only doing a certain number of participants so that we're safe. So those are some of the things that definitely changed from going to do studies, and then also doing remote studies. So probably previously would have ran the studies in person with people in our community. And then also, I guess, being able to expand the reach of the people that participate in your studies as well. What were the other questions again?
Yeah, just yeah. No, this is great. Thank you. Maybe Ayanna?
So I guess doing a PhD during COVID was definitely a transition, but there are things that made it easier. So I think working with you, Orit, in the HCI lab made getting pilot testing, whereas like normally I'd go around my campus and try to find pilot testers, and that wasn't possible, but having access to the HCI lab was definitely a huge help in that. Then I think in a general sense, although it's kind of unfortunate that we did all have to go remote, it definitely made me much more appreciative of being able to be on campus once it opened back up. So being here now is like, it's like my emotions are just at 1,000. It's like, I'm super happy to go into campus whenever I'm here. So I think, yeah, overall just like made me way more grateful for the experience of being able to be on campus.
Great. And I hope that we will continue to see each other both online and face-to-face. Alberta?
At the time COVID hit, I was wrapping up my master's and transitioning into the PhD. So that was a somewhat difficult transition, especially since I had to wrap up the experiments that I was doing with my master's project and not having access to participants anymore. And then starting this new project where I had all remote participants who were not students as I was used to. That was also an adjustment, making sure that, because now you don't have the people in person, you don't schedule based on their classes, you're scheduling with people with real lives and real issues who are going through real problems as well. So that was an adjustment as well, but I think overall it gave me a better appreciation of the research direction I'm going into, learning about remote work and how these technologies can support all this. It gave me a better sense of purpose with what I'm doing. So that was great.
Great, thank you. And Nabil?
Yeah, so before the COVID pandemic, I was working on a different project with the driving simulator, but since the pandemic, I had to switch to a different method of studies because we couldn't really do an experiment at the lab. So it's been challenging, but also I really got to explore different ways to conduct studies. So that's been really helpful also.
Great, thank you. And I just have to say, it's really impressive to see how the four of you adapted kind of your original plans and really managed to find not only kind of adapt the topics of your research, but also come up with new and creative methods to do research. I think that we're going to ask the audience if they have any questions. So you can raise your hand if you want to ask any question, and Andrew will call on people.
Yes, please go ahead and either just raise your hand, or you can also type. I'm happy to read your questions, or you can read them.
I'm going to jump in briefly and just say that if anyone wants to try the text-based system we use for the VR experiments where we ask the creative questions, I'm going to put the number in the chat.
Great idea.
So you can try it.
And so you have to type VR, right, to get started?
Yep. Text VR to the number, and you should get some responses. Okay.
And Helena, I think you have a question.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate everybody sharing their experiences trying to do their PhD in this kind of new world that we've been thrown into. And what I'm actually wanted to ask about, though, was, you know, a lot of us, when we started looking at what does it look like to be doing work in this distributed context, some of us really were trying to look at prior research and see what have we learned in the past and what actually is applicable to this context that we're living through, that we're all together living through, and what haven't we been able to really capture in the past. And thus, this is a really unique opportunity. And I was just wondering if everybody could maybe reflect upon that. What prior work did they say, oh, this is really interesting to build on? And where did you see the gaps all of a sudden pop up? And you're like, that's the question that we need to ask.
So I'm not going to call on you by order, so feel free to just unmute yourself and answer.
I think for me, it was the speaking to the participants during the study, realizing that most people carry a lot of devices around them, not knowing how they can use it for more than what it's usually advertised for. So people feeling like, I can use a VR headset for more than just games. Like, it's not something I buy for my son or for the young children at home. I, as an adult, can use it. And that to me is an eye-opener. That technology doesn't necessarily have to be narrowed down to a single point, that we can always think around how we can use these for better things and how it can actually adapt to changing situations.
Thank you.
So I don't know if Monsurat or Ayanna or Nabil, you wanted to add something? But also, okay, Nabil, you wanted to say something.
Yes, so I just wanted to mention, like, one of the things I noticed after the COVID was, like, there was a lot of research before the pandemic about working from home and some of the advantages of working from home, but I never really noticed those research before the pandemic hit. So once we are actually forced to work from home, I actually saw like how there has been like a lot of research on this topic. And yeah.
So I wanted to kind of follow up on Helena's question, which is, you know, clearly there is this range of possible tools that we can use to assess or to understand how humans interact with computers, from surveys to controlled lab experiments to less controlled lab experiments, and all the way to deployment in the real world. So I was wondering if you can reflect on this a bit, given our situation. And I think some of this came up already in the description. I think all of you probably mentioned this, not having been able to do things in the lab, but how do you feel you're learning now, and how do you feel you're able to test your hypotheses and get to that point of completing your research, in contrast to the path you would have taken, given that, you know, probably, would you have done the same thing? Would you have done exactly the same thing, or would there have been many more lab experiments? And how do you feel this is affecting the work that you're doing. So maybe Monsurat and then Ayanna.
Yeah, so I think for me, being that we're in a pandemic, I think it allows me to actually do a better job of testing my theories, because the people who are participating in my study are actually remotely. It's not like I have students in 3 classrooms testing out my thing. Like, these are people who are actually meeting regularly, and they usually use Zoom. And now I'm having them use what I designed and seeing how that actually improves whatever they're working on. And then also thinking about like past research, as Helena asked, like, so there was like Olsen and Olsen, and how they did a lot of research on collaborating remotely in teams, and thinking about like, how can you better establish trust, or how can you have a better motivating sense of presence with others? Because looking at everyone's squares is very different from like being embodied in VR and seeing everyone and being able to like reach out to them. And so like thinking about that, and I think that definitely changes the way like I test and study my research, and definitely the outcomes for sure.
Yeah, we had a major shift in our study as well. Originally, it was going to be a qualitative study. And so this turned it into a quantitative study, which allowed for kind of like building behavioral models or health behavior models based off of past research, and kind of doing a rigorous statistical analysis to see in what way does extended reality impact cognition or impact emotions to create these behavior changes. And I think that definitely caused a change in the way that I kind of go about methods, because that was very adaptive to the situation versus something that I thought about before.
Thank you. So I see a hand raised, and then so Margot, and then Olivia. So
yes, hello. I love VR, and I took a class last semester on it. I think it's a very cool medium for meeting people across the digital space. But for me personally, I experienced a lot of side effects. Like, I got really motion sick, very dizzy. I really couldn't, it was like very hard to be in it for an extended period of time. Yeah, like just lag, etc. Like, how do you combat those disadvantages like with your research? And do you feel like the technology today is like at the level that you would like it to be for your research ideally, or do you feel like there's still a lot of work to be done?
I think there's still a lot of work to be done, but at the same time, I do think it's at a good enough place for me to do the research that I'm interested in. But yes, there's definitely some issues. And I think one of the ways we kind of mitigate the long-term use issue is by having studies that are shorter term. But we definitely have a need for having longer studies, especially for people who are working on improving the headsets, making them lighter, improving the view range and all of that. So I think there's definitely room for improvement, but I also think that we can use some of its benefits already. Absolutely.
do people get used to them? I would imagine that getting over, is it like, you go on a boat and, you might be motion sick for a while, but then ultimately you get better after extended periods of time?
I think for me, after extended period of time, I got worse, at least for me, but it varies. I think some people are immediately sick, and then I'm not always, like, sometimes, I guess, for different experiences, maybe just what I did during the day, and I just feel like more unwell being in VR.
Yeah, and Margot said the same thing. Olivia, would you like to ask a question? And I don't know if you have, yeah, go ahead if you'd like to, or I can read it.
Sure. Yeah, I was wondering if you guys were interested in staying in academia, pursuing this research, or like you were interested in doing this in industry. Like, in our class, we've learned about like bigger companies, like Project Jacquard is one where like they do a lot of research in like in industry, and then it goes like straight to like development. And like I have no preference for either, like really no which is like preferable if there is preference. And like basically if you guys have experience or like any understanding of the differences and like which ones, like the difference in goals. Obviously one is more like around monetization, but also like, you know, like which one do you have more flexibility in what you're designing and pursuing, and like which one seems to like move faster. Just like, yeah. And if you just want to speak on this topic, that would be awesome.
Olivia, can I ask, do you mean, are they looking for a faculty position, or do you mean more like when you're graduating from an undergrad, should you start with grad school to explore some of these things or go into industry? What's your interest?
I was like basically both right now. Like
Okay.
I'm personally not looking at grad school. Like I would just like lean towards industry first, but I was also wondering, like, you know, I guess I could have a more pointed question, which is like, why did they choose grad school over going into industry? What benefits does that pose, and like the freedoms of like being in an academic space and having mentors and people who are more interested in your like personal growth and research for the sake of research. Yeah, so really like anything in that window I'm like interested in hearing about.
Thank you. So I think all four of you should probably tell us this. I want to hear this. Oh, Alberta, do you want to go first? You're first on my, I'll just go across my screen and call on everyone.
Let's see. I think for me, it was just the interest on the topic. So I was really interested in the field of HCI, and I wanted to explore it a bit more. I didn't think that going straight into industry, where it's like there's a short cycle, you're trying to produce things, get it on the market quick, was going to help me really delve into the topic as much as I wanted to. So that for me was the biggest motivation. I'm glad I did.
Thank you. Nabil, do you want to go next?
Yes. So when I first started my PhD, not even PhD, when I started my master's, my goal was to be in academia. But now I see that there's a lot of interesting research in industry as well. So I'm not so sure, but my first choice will still be to be in academia.
Okay. Monsurat, would you like to go next?
All right. So for me, actually, I didn't actually originally plan to go to grad school. So my undergrad was actually in mechanical engineering because I just like to build things. But I was also interested in computer science. But I hadn't done any, I didn't take any computer science classes or do any computer science research, but I did a lot of self-learning on computer science, and I had some internships during my undergrad. But I wanted to explore research, so I applied to a master's program. And then my master's program, I wasn't planning on doing a PhD, but then I learned about HCI. So I didn't originally know about HCI when I joined and went for a master's degree. And then I learned about HCI through a read and my advisor. And then I was like, oh, this is awesome. So then that's how I ended up in my PhD program. In terms of whether I want to go into industry or academia, I want to go into industry. I think research is really interesting, but I do like the shorter cycles for building things quickly and sending it out to users and having people try it. So for me personally, I like industry.
Thank you. And Ayanna.
So when I was in undergrad, a lot of our instructors were either current PhD students or just really recently finished their PhDs. And I thought their work was super interesting, and I just knew I wanted to do exactly what they were doing. So that led me to my master's program. And during that process, I didn't really get to engage in too much rigorous research. So I just kind of put it out there closer to the end of that I wanted to continue in doing a PhD. And so the stars kind of aligned, and I ended up in a PhD program. So that's kind of how that journey progressed. And then right now, I think I'm still leaning towards academia. I love academia. I love being on campus. I love the environment. I love the work. But I'm still open to working in industry, especially if it's a type of position where I can still do scientific research and create publications and do that stuff.
Thank you. And we can certainly return to this. So, Olivia, did you have something else to ask?
Yeah, I was wondering,
unmuted.
like, maybe a more pointed thing is like, for all of these panelists, like, what are different like dimensions to like consider? Like, let's say if I'm someone who like potentially would like to go to grad school later, like I'm definitely interested in CS and design. Like basically what are the factors that like, or like the axes if you were doing like grad school and industry, like based on like what are things to consider, like in regards to like, flexibility and like the timing of cycles, like, but like what are things I should know about myself in order to make an informed decision? Like, should I know if I like want to see products I make used widespread, or like be able to like stay, or like if I want to like write papers and like stay more in the like hypothetical space and like ideation. Yeah, more about like advice to someone considering both. Yeah.
Who wants to take that on? You're thinking about it. I'll let you think about it. And you're not asking me, but I'll tell you anyway, because, but I don't think you can make a big mistake. I think that's important to also note. And I would really like to hear the panelists, but I think there are many paths to success. I think to me, that's important to remember. It's very unlikely that you'll make this horrendous mistake that, oh no, I got myself with a master's program and now it's all over, or I missed out on it. So I think that's also worth considering. But I really want to hear the panelists, and I wanted to give them a minute to think about this. But
I mean,
we'll go in the room. Okay, go ahead, Monsurat.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I would echo what you said, Andrew. Like, I think, like, especially for my case, like I kind of just went where my curiosity led me. So I think you can't really go wrong with that. And you can always reevaluate. Like, you're not locked into whatever you choose. If you go to a PCA program and you do your first research project, you write your first research paper, and you're like, this is not for me, you can leave. Like, so I think wherever your pull is most towards, I think that's what you should choose. And in terms of dimensions, I think it really boils down to like what you define success as. If you define success as, I want to work on cool products that people use, and I want to make lots of money, then probably industry is for you. If you're like, I want to produce knowledge, I want to try a bunch of different research projects. Maybe what I'm interested in researching doesn't make money in industry, but I'm still interested in the topic, then maybe academia is for you. So like, I think it really, really boils down to like what you define as success and what interests you, and kind of let that be your guiding star, and know that you can always course correct if you decide that your original choice isn't what you thought it would be.
Thank you, Monsurat. I just want to kind of jump in and say that there is kind of fluidity between the decisions. So you can start a graduate program and then do an internship in industry and kind of go back to complete your graduate program and then decide that you want to leave after the master and not stay for the PhD, or complete a PhD and then go to industry. So it's not a one-point decision that you have to make and stay with that course. There is a lot of opportunities to correct or change course and explore and go back. Maybe
also
we
worth
will
saying that I do want to point out, since we're Orid's guests, and I think that the research that goes on in your lab, Orid, is a wonderful window into some of those graduate experiences. It's a unique place, so it's worth exploring that environment if you're at Wellesley. So I think we have one more question that I see in the chat. So maybe Alyssa, you can ask your question, and then we should wrap up the recorded part.
Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed today's conversation. I'm a PhD student at Georgia Tech, and I've run a couple of these projects in industry. And so my background is in manufacturing, and I was really hoping to kind of get your perspective on this area, since you're working more in kind of the R&D space, really in the front of design and using these kinds of tools. What are your thoughts, like when you see these conversations ongoing about using AR and VR on the manufacturing shop floor or in construction field sites?
I think it's a great idea for learning, especially compared to like reading books. Like, don't do this, but like being able to like be embedded in a virtual space of what the manufacturing floor looks like to get some training, and before you actually like go onto the floor. I think that's really interesting and useful.
Any other comments? I mean, there's also the, I guess Alberta and Nabil might be able to talk to us about sort of a parallel to the work, right? As in well-being.
Right. I think yes, it's going to be a useful tool if you're putting it in industry and people get the practical know-how versus just reading it in books. But then the issue about motion sickness comes up. The issue about how well the people are trained when using it. How long should they use it? Is it more detrimental than useful? So some of these things will need to be considered before actually deploying it on the market.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's interesting because there are several industries, right, which have already taken steps to really incorporate AR, right, like Google Glass and their Enterprise Edition on the shop floor, and how that's tied to things like benefits and quality metrics, right? So I think that's one thing that I was kind of trying to get at there, was seeing what you guys thought in terms of how these tools can affect people's long-term like work health and life balance when we're thinking about really changing some very traditional industries that, you know, are going from paper-based work instructions straight into a virtual environment, right? It's a set of really interesting contrasts.
Right.
Yeah, this is, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, like any new technology, the onboarding process must be done very delicately, especially for people who might have been working in these industries for many, many years and are used to doing a paper-based training. There needs to be time put into retraining and making sure they're comfortable with the technology enough to get the full benefits of using the technology.
Thank you. That's a great point.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I noticed that in all of your work too, that like you play this role, right, of being a trainer often, right, when you're going through and deploying these kinds of tools. And the same thing goes for these workplaces, right? So it's interesting to think about how that research role changes when you're putting things into practice.
Thank you. And I think that another very interesting direction within the context of manufacturing floor would be safety, right? How can we completely revolutionize safety, since you are trained in an environment that could give you a contextual real-time feedback? It's like, hey, don't put your hand there. It's really hot, right? So I think there are opportunities to use these technologies for better training, for better balance, and perhaps even kind of the more basic is like for better safety first, to keep employees away from accidents in construction or the manufacturing floor. So I'm really happy to hear that, to wrap up with this question, because this is really an opportunity to continue and think about mixed reality for the future of work and well-being within the context of work. So we're going to wrap up the formal recorded part here. You're welcome to stay with us for more informal networking. I just want to mention that next week, CHIWORK is going back to the regular schedule, which is 11 a.m. Eastern time. And there will be a conversation on AI and worker well-being that Chris is going to host. So join us for that. Thank you, everyone.